Great. Karthik, thank you so much. It's a privilege anytime we're asked to do anything in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's so great to be with all of you. My name is Henry M. I'm an alcoholic. A few very important things, or maybe the most important things about my journey, through the grace of a loving God, strong sponsorship, and a commitment to helping other alcoholics through the process the same way I was helped, active membership in a home group, and a commitment to keep the primary purpose in my life primary. I've been free of alcohol in any form since August 26, 2011. And for that, I owe AA my life. But Karthik, do you think that's a good place to start? And then I just, if I go on too long for the translation, just let me know. But if you want to do it like that, we can.
Yeah, we can do like this, but you can go much longer. I
Much
will
longer.
raise. I will anyway raise my hand. If you are going.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right. Good, good,
Okay. So
good.
let me take that, man, and let me translate that.
Sure.
If you're okay. Okay. Uh,
Perfect.
all
Perfect.
right. So ఆయన పేరు ఒక్క నిమిషం అండి. ఆయన పేరు హెన్రీ అండి. ఆయన ఒక త్రాగుబోతు. ఆగస్టు 26, 2011 నుంచి ఆయన సోబర్ గా ఉన్నారు. ఆ సో ఆ, ఆయన ఏంటంటే విజన్ ఫర్ మెడిలియన్ గ్రూప్ నుంచి వచ్చారు కొలంబియాలో. సో అక్కడ దాకా నేను ట్రాన్స్లేట్ చేశాను. ఇక్కడ నుంచి ఆయన మాట్లాడుదాం. ప్లీజ్ గో హెడ్.
Great. Thank you. And so it's wonderful to be connected. This is the magic of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm connected to my new friend Karthik and this wonderful group in India. I am myself personally in South America in Medellin, Colombia. Maybe you can hear by my accent, I am not Colombian. Estoy practicando mi español, pero necesito practicar más. I'm learning Spanish, and my home group is an English speaking meeting of expats here in Medellin, Colombia. But I was born in the United States, and that's where I did most of my drinking. What I'm going to venture to do in the time that we have is share with you maybe the only thing I have of any value, and it's my experience. Even though we are from different sides of the world, each and every one of us, if we sat down together, person to person, we would know more about each other because of our common alcoholism than the average people. I would know more about you, your inner thoughts, your inner feelings, the allergy of the body, the obsession of the mind, the spiritual malady, all of the things that make us alcoholic. We would know that about one another before we even began to learn about the personality. And what I'm going to do, I was tasked, and thank you, Karthik, for giving me. I like to follow directions. I follow directions a little better today than I used to. But the topic or the idea, a thread maybe that we can discuss is something that has been ever important in my life. And there's an excerpt from Bill's story that really illustrates this particular concept. It's at the bottom of page 14 in the English translation of the fourth edition. It talks about faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. And I didn't know what any of this meant. Oh, perfect. Good stopping point. All right. Thank you, Karthik.
Usually, whenever you have a natural pause, that would be a good place, like a chunk of your soul.
Perfect.
But you're doing great,
Perfect.
man. Don't worry. Okay.
All right. Thanks.
ఓకే. సో ఆయన చెప్పేది ఏంటంటే ఇప్పుడు మెడలిన్ లో ఉన్నారు. అంటే అది కొలంబియాలో. ఆ, కాకపోతే ఏంటంటే ఆయన ఇక్కడ ఇంగ్లీష్ గ్రూప్ మాట్లాడే గ్రూప్ కి వెళ్తారు. అది కాకుండా ఆ, 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 ఏంటంటే మన ఆ, ఈయన తాగుడంతా అమెరికాలోనే చేశారు, ఇక్కడ చేయలేదు. సో ఈ రోజు టాపిక్ ఏంటంటే మనకు వచ్చి ఆధ్యాత్మికంగా ఎలా ఎదగాలి. ఎందుకంటే బిల్డబ్ల్యూ చాలా క్లియర్ గా రాస్తాడు, నీకు ఎదుగుదల లేకపోతే ముందు ముందు నువ్వు పడిపోతావు, గ్యారంటీ. అది కష్టాల్లో వస్తాయి అంటే పడచ్చు, పడిపోతాం అని లేదు, సారీ నాది తప్పు, గ్యారంటీ కాదు, అదే పడచ్చు. ఆ సో దాని గురించి మాట్లాడడానికి ఈయన ఇప్పుడు ముందుకు వచ్చారు. ప్లీజ్ గో ఎడ్.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karthik. And well, right now you're in India. I am in South America. I'll tell you a little bit about how my alcoholism came to be present in my life. I was born in a small farming and agricultural town in the middle of the United States, in the state called Illinois, in a little town between a city, St. Louis, in the south, and Chicago in the north. And I I'm born there. It's a small town. It's a town in America where much of the industry has died and gone away. It was a town that at one time used to be thriving and had opportunity, but it now turned into sort of a sad shadow of its former self. And that's where I was born. Uh, I have my parents and were there at the time, obviously, and I have one sister. And my father was the hardest drinking man I ever knew. Alcoholism is rampant in my family. We are, by heritage, Irish Catholics. And this sort of sets the scene. A lot of drinking, a lot of disruption in the household. My father was a very violent alcoholic. And I had set this stage for discontent. I just knew that I didn't belong where I was. I would be playing as a kid, and when I was in the house or I was inside, I wanted to be outside. When I was outside, I wanted to be inside. When I was upstairs, I wanted to be downstairs. When I was downstairs, I wanted to be upstairs. When I was playing soccer, I was thinking about baseball. When I was playing baseball, I was thinking about soccer. And I was never present where my feet were. And I didn't know there was any other way to live. That's just the way it was for me. Is that a good
యా
pause?
యా సో ఈయన చెప్పేది ఏంటంటే ఈయన చిన్నప్పుడు ఆ, ఒక ఎక్కడైతే పెరిగారో ఆ ఊర్లో ఆ జాబులన్నీ కూడా ఆ, వెళ్ళిపోయినాయి. ఏంటంటే అసలు జాబులు చేయడానికే లేదు. ఆ, దాని తర్వాత ఆ, ఈయనకి అక్కడ ఏం చేయాలో తెలియదు. అంటే అలాంటి పరిస్థితుల్లో ఈయన పెరిగారు అన్నమాట. అసలు ఇంకేమీ చేయడానికి లేదు ఆ ఊర్లో. అలా అని చెప్తున్నారు. ప్లీజ్ గో హెడ్.
Perfect. And so this is the environment. And I remember this period of my life, and I remember the chaos in the household and the conflict that I felt because I was very conflicted with my father. On one hand, he was like my hero. He taught me how to throw and catch a baseball. He taught me how to play soccer. He worked in the military. He was in the military and he was a pilot during we had a war in America, the Vietnam War, and he was very active in that. and he was very mechanical and very handy, and he would also repair the airplanes, and he was just a very talented guy mechanically with his hands, and he'd fix up these old cars, and he would restore them. And I remember he turned the first time for me that I had identification in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I first identified the description of the alcoholic more in my experience with my father than I could in the beginning with myself. And this is the way it was. And I saw my father go through this process, and he began to demonstrate all of the descriptions of the alcoholic collapse, things like brief periods of recovery, followed by even worse relapse. My father would get these violent streaks, and he would come the next morning out of a blackout and not know what happened. He would begin to retreat, and he would stay away because he knew his alcoholism was getting worse, and it was like he was losing his mind. And then they say, there's Newton's first law of motion. An object in motion stays in motion until it comes in contact with a greater force. And my childhood was like this. I was this object in motion. And then when I was 12 years old, two things would happen that would come in contact with my life that would change it forever. The first was my old man. He was in the military reserves. So periodically, he would go away for training camps, which wasn't uncommon. One day he came over to see me and told me he was going away for a while, which was normal. He seemed a little strange, but I didn't think much of it. Except that day when he left me, he didn't go away to a training camp. He went home to his little apartment he was living in. He sat down in a chair. He put a gun to his chest and he pulled the trigger. He killed himself. And I share with you that to share with you this, that I believe with alcoholism, spoiler alert, all of us, if you're alcoholic, we're all going to quit drinking. Death is one way to make that happen. I'm going to quit drinking. I just want to be alive when it happens. And then the second thing that came into my life when I was 12 thereafter was the first time the most instant and perfect cure for the soul sickness I suffered from would come in contact with the medicine. Pause there.
Excellent. All right. సో వాట్ ఏంటంటే ఆయన ఏం చెప్తున్నారంటే ఆ ఇప్పుడు ఫస్ట్ ఆల్కహాలిక్స్ కొని అనానమస్ కి వచ్చినప్పుడు ఆయన ఆయనకంటే ఆయన ఫాదర్ ది కనెక్ట్ అవటం జరిగింది, ఎందుకంటే ఆయన నాన్నగారు కూడా తాగుబోతు. సో ఎలాగ ఆపలేము, ఒకసారి మొదలు పెడితే ఆపితే మళ్ళీ ఎలా త్రాగుతాం, ఎలా ఆపలేము అన్నదే ఆ ఏంటంటే ఆయన వాళ్ళ ఫాదర్ ని చూసి ఆయన అంతే ఎన్నోసార్లు ఆపుదాం ఆ, అనుకుని ఆయన ఆపలేకపోయారు. బీభత్సంగా తాగేవారు. ఒకసారి ఈయన ఒక క్యాంప్ లో ఉంటే అక్కడికి వచ్చి కలిసి వెళ్ళారు. దాని తర్వాత ఆయన సూసైడ్ చేసుకున్నాడు, చంపేసుకున్నాడు. ఆ, రెండోది నాకు ఏమి నచ్చిందంటే ఏలో ఈ మెడికల్ ఆస్పెక్ట్ ఏదైతే ఉందో త్రాగుబోతనం గురించి, దాని గురించి వివరణ. ఈ ఏంటంటే నాకు నేనుగా రిలేట్ అవ్వకపోయినా మా నాన్నగారిని చూసి నేను రిలేట్ అవ్వటం ఎక్కువైంది. నేను వచ్చిన కొత్తల్లో అని చెప్తున్నా. ప్లీజ్ గో హెడ్.
Thank you, Karthik. And so this is the stage, and this is how it's set. And I really, really like chocolate chip cookies. I don't know what the dessert of choice is in India. In For me growing up, I loved to bake chocolate chip cookies. My grandmother would bake them, and I remember the whole house would smell like freshly baked cookies, and I loved it. Well, as much as I love chocolate chip cookies, I cannot remember the first time I had one. I couldn't tell you where I was, what it tasted like. I don't remember my first cookie. But today, as we are all here together, um, I had my first drink at the age of 12, my last drink at the age of 33, and I'm now 47 years old. I've been sober August 26, 2011. I'll have is my sobriety date. And that many years later, some 35 years later, I can remember in vivid detail the first time I felt the effect produced by alcohol. It was transformational. By this time, my mother is working overnight to provide for the family, and my sister began to have these parties in the United States. When your parents are working or they're out of the house, the kids in high school, they come together and they have a party, and everybody from the neighborhood brings whatever alcohol they can get their hands on. And my sister had these parties, and I remember I kept bugging her, right? Because I wanted to meet some of her friends. I was turning 12 or 13. And when you turn a certain age, you start to take an interest in girls, and some are perhaps or interested in others. And I started to have that experience. And I remember going to this party, and it was, one of those parties where there was a picnic table with a big punch bowl on it, and everybody brought whatever they could, and they all poured it and mixed it together with this fruit punch, and made this sort of like hooch kind of drink. And I remember watching them put in this alcohol. Somebody added Boone's Farm, which is a real cheap kind of sweet, disgusting wine. One of my favorites that I really liked was this alcohol called Mad Dog 2020. And Mad Dog 2020 is great because the bottle is shaped like a poison bottle, and you could fit it inside of your jacket. So you would go to football games and you could take the drink with you and sneak it. I loved that. And then they had this alcohol. It's one of the strongest there was. I don't even know if it's legal anymore, but it's called Purple Passion, and it's pure grain alcohol with like a little food coloring to taste like grapes or something. And they mixed all that up, and everybody got in a line, and then they would pass you a cup, and you would drink it. And I remember sitting there at that moment, and maybe this conversation that we're having today regarding the spiritual life, maybe we all arrive here perfect. Maybe when we're born, anything we ever wanted to be, we already are. And anything we ever needed, we already have. We are one and from the Creator, the power. And so I had this instinct as they're preparing to pass me the plastic cup. Something inside of me says, you shouldn't be doing this. Don't you know what happened to your dad? This is dangerous. This is bad for you. I had an instinct that I shouldn't do it. Well, the problem was there was an even greater and louder voice in my head. And I'm looking around at the party, and all the kids are having fun. They're talking, they're laughing. It looks like they have something. And see, it looks like they have something. And inside, I feel like I'm nothing. So maybe if I do what they do, some of their something is going to rub off on my nothing. And I took that drink and I drank it down. And here's the experience: the alcohol went down deep inside of me and wrapped itself around every raw, exposed nerve that I had. Alcohol transformed me. It made me feel as though if you've ever been held underwater, or you're swimming, or you scramble to get to the top, and you're almost out of breath, and you finally are able to take this big inhale and get that relief. That was the sensation that my first drink gave me. Alcohol made me feel so good that the way I would feel without it would never ever be good enough again. Good spot to translate.
యా షూర్. ఆవిడ ఈయన గ్రాండ్ మదర్ ఏదైతే ఉందో కుకీస్ అంటే చాక్లెట్ కుకీస్ చేసేది చిన్నప్పుడు. ఆ కుకీస్ చాలా ఇష్టమైంది. కానీ ఈరోజు తలుచుకుంటే అంతలా గుర్తులేదు ఆ కుకీ టేస్ట్. అంత ఇష్టమైన పదార్థం కూడా. అదే త్రాగుడు తీసుకున్నారనుకోండి, ఏంటంటే ఆ అప్పుడు ఆ ఏమవుద్ది, ఈయన ఫస్ట్ టైం త్రాగింది కూడా ఈయనకి గుర్తుంది. ఆ, అది త్రాగుడికి దీనికి అంత ఇష్టం. త్రాగుడు. ఈయన వెళ్ళటం జరిగింది దేనికి, ఆ ఒక పార్టీకి. అంటే మామూలుగా కొంచెం వయసు వచ్చాక కొంచెం అమ్మాయిలు అంటే ఇష్టం ఉండి, లేకపోతే ఎవరి ఇష్టాలే ఇష్టం ఉండి పార్టీలకు వెళ్ళటం ఇలాంటివి జరుగుతాయి కదా, అలాగే వెళ్ళటం జరిగింది. వెళ్ళటం జరిగితే అక్కడ ఒక కోకోనట్, అదే ఒక పంచ్ లాగా ఆల్కహాల్ తో తయారు చేసిన పంచ్ ఒకటి ఉంది. అందరూ మాట్లాడుకుంటున్నారు, అందరూ ఏదో చేస్తున్నారు. ఈయనకేమో దాంట్లో ఇంకా ఫిట్ లేదు, ఇంకా ఫిట్ అవట్లా దాంట్లోకి. ఆ సో ఏమవుతుంది, ఆ ఫిట్ అవ్వకుండా, ఆ ఆ, కాకపోతే ఒక్కసారి ఈ పంచ్ తీసుకున్నాక అది మొత్తం అయిన బాడీని ర్యాప్ చేసినట్టు, అంటే అదొక కవచంలా అయిపోయింది. ఆ సిగ్గు నుంచి వీటి నుంచి ఒక కవచంలా అయింది అని చెప్తున్నారు. ప్లీజ్ గో.
Great, thank you so much. And so, as many of you know, once you have the effect produced by alcohol come in contact with your alcoholism, once you have that effect, you can't unsee it. It's so powerful. And I loved alcohol. And my life would continue like this. There's a line in the book that I could save us all an hour and tell you what my drinking was like. There's a line in the big book that says eventually things got worse. And eventually things did get worse. But for many years, alcohol was my power by which to live. It allowed me to accomplish my first parts of my career. It allowed me to finish school. It allowed me to ask a girl on a date for the first time. It allowed me to dance at parties. It allowed me to come out and play. Alcohol was my power by which to live. And I would drink during this time, and a couple of things that would begin to happen where I noticed my alcoholism was becoming troublesome is my whole life I dedicated my life to playing soccer. I had a talent for playing. I was pretty fast, and I was like at a low center of gravity, so I did well with it. And there was this the first time alcohol started to give me real consequences. There was a big tournament coming up, and it was a tournament in the United States where you're in high school, you play in this tournament, so hopefully college coaches can see you play, and then they might recruit you and you can earn a scholarship and this type of thing. This was the idea, and the tournament was Saturday. Well, on Thursday we all skipped school and drank, and I remember we were drinking, and I was with my friends, and one of them was riding around on a bicycle, and I thought it would be a good idea to get on the handlebars of that bicycle. And we were on the handlebars of the bicycle, and we started going fast down the hill, and we were drunk. And anyway, we fell over and took a tumble, and I hurt my knee, and I was unable to play. I'd worked for years. Bill talks about this in his story, working on something for years, only right before the event, you throw it all away. And that's what I'd done. And so I missed the tournament and ended up going to a different school, and I would continue on. And my alcoholism began to progress. As I drank more, it used to be, going to a beer party and drinking 6 or 8 beers and then passing out. And then our beer was no longer getting me where I needed to go. It just wasn't working fast enough. So I would then switch to harder liquor. And I would drink whiskey. I loved whiskey. Kentucky bourbon was one of my favorites. Maker's Mark, Kentucky bourbon. And then I would also drink a lot of gin and tonics, Tanqueray tonic. Love Tanqueray tonics. Those were one of my favorites. And I would drink that stuff to excess. And my life would continue like this. And one thing that ended up changing, so I started to get these little consequences, and I ended up quitting school, and I was in college in the late '90s, and um, India at this time was already coming on as the hub in the world for technical support and BPO, and a lot of great technology innovations are coming out of India. And I remember leaving Kentucky and going, we were drunk one night and we decided to have a coin toss, where you flip a coin and it says heads or tails. And heads, we were going to move to New York City because I always wanted to live in New York City. And tails, we were going to go live on the West Coast. And I lost drunk. And that's how I made all my decisions. I made all my decisions in a blackout. And so I packed up. I was a waiter waiting tables at a restaurant for a summer to save enough money, and we packed up and went out to the West Coast. I went out to Seattle, Washington, home of Amazon in the mid to late '90s, and that's where I would begin kind of my adult life. A good place to stop.
యా షూర్, ఎక్సలెంట్. సో హెన్రీ గారు ఏమంటున్నారంటే అండి, ఆయన ముందు ఆ రోజు పార్టీలో ఆ తేడా కనిపించింది కదా, సో తాగటం మొదలు పెట్టారు. అప్పుడులో నేను అదే ఆటలు కూడా ఆడేవాడిని, ఫుట్బాల్ అలాగా, కాకపోతే మధ్యలో మానేశాను. ఆ, ఎందుకంటే త్రాగుడు వల్ల మెల్లిగా త్రాగుడు బియర్ నుంచి విస్కీకి వచ్చాను. విస్కీలో కెంటకీ విస్కీ ఇష్టం నాకు. ఆ, అలా త్రాగుతూ త్రాగుతూ కాలేజ్కి అయ్యాక కూడా మా 10 మంది ఫ్రెండ్స్ ఎక్కడికి వెళ్దాం. ఇది సుమారుగా 90లో. ఒకటేమో టాస్ వేసారంట తాగేసి. ఈ టాస్ లో ఒకవేళ ఇదైతే ఈస్ట్ కోస్ట్ వెళ్దాం లేకపోతే వెస్ట్ కోస్ట్ వెళ్దాం. తాగేసి బ్లాక్అవుట్ లో ఈయన టాస్ ఓడిపోయాడు, వెస్ట్ కోస్ట్ కి. సో నేను అలాగే తీసుకునేవాడిని నిర్ణయాలు, ఇలా టాస్ లేసి తాగేసి తాగేసిన బ్లాక్అవుట్ లో తీసుకునేవాడిని నిర్ణయాలు. ఆ ఇప్పుడు ఈ వెస్ట్ కోస్ట్ లో అప్పుడే అమెజాన్ అది మొదలైంది 90లో, అమెజాన్ కంపెనీ. సో అక్కడ నా అడల్ట్ లైఫ్ స్టార్ట్ చేశాను అని చెప్తున్నా. ప్లీజ్ గో.
Great, thank you, Karthik. And so this is now where I am out in the world, and I'm beginning my life. I'm beginning to drink more and more, and it's starting to affect my work. In this time, I get involved with a startup company. It's in telecommunications and call center BPO, and we develop an IPPBX, and we have some tech support outsourced to India, and we have two big call centers in the Philippines, in Manila, and in Pasig City and Makati. And so I started spending time as an expat from a young age, probably 21, 22. I was living internationally, working internationally, and I had no supervision. And as you know, if you're in India or the Philippines and you're servicing clients in the United States, you can work strange hours. And so I was in Manila working from 10 o'clock at night local time until 6 a.m. And when I would finish work at 6 a.m., I would leave my office and go back to the hotel. And there are nice people, professional people having breakfast because it's 7 a.m. in the morning, 7:30 in the morning, time for breakfast. And I'm over in the corner, ordering food for the appearance, but I'm really there to drink, and I'm just getting hammered. And I remember the waiter came over one morning as I'm ordering another bottle of wine, and he said, "Sir, you've already had two bottles of wine, and it was only 7:30 in the morning." And that's the level my drinking started to escalate to. I started to drink aggressively and drink for the effect. I kept pushing the envelope. And some more consequences began to happen. A few things, a few turning points. And I would then return to one of the locations that we had in the U.S. was in Las Vegas, Nevada. So I would return to Las Vegas, and I was there for a while. And in Las Vegas, um, things started to progress. So I had my first drink at the age of 12, and my last drink at the age of 33. But in between that time, that 21 years, I would try every pill, powder, potion, and lotion to fix my emotions I get my hands on. So I tried many things. And in Las Vegas is when I was introduced to powder cocaine, and that would accelerate my drinking. So I would do substances to help me drink more because at a certain point when I drank, I would get sloppy or I would pass out and I could only drink so much and I wanted to drink more. So I would take substances to increase my ability to drink. And if you live like that, you're out of control. And eventually something is going to stop you. And there was one time where I was in some seedy nightclub in Las Vegas and oh, that's a good place to pause.
థ్యాంక్ యూ. సో ఏమైంది ఈయన అమెజాన్ లో అప్పుడు ఏదో ఐటీవీ అంటే అది ఇప్పుడు కొత్తగా చేసి కాల్ సెంటర్లు ఈయన ఆ, రెండు రెండు దేశాల్లో ఉండేది, ఇండియాలో కూడా ఒక ఆఫీస్ ఉండేది. సో ఈయనకి స్టార్టింగ్ నుంచి కూడా 21 ఏళ్ళ నుంచి కూడా ఈయనకి వేరే దేశాల్లో పనిచేయడం అలవాటే ఎక్స్పార్ట్ కింద. కాకపోతే మీరు ఇండియా నుంచి అది పనిచేస్తే అమెరికా క్లయింట్లకి ఏం చేస్తారు, రాత్రి అంతా పనిచేస్తారు. సో అదే ఇండియాను ఒక ఎగ్జాంపుల్ చూస్తారు, వేరే దేశాల్లో కూడా అంతే. సో ఆడ్ అవర్స్ లో రెస్టారెంట్లకి వెళ్ళి ఏదో బ్రేక్ఫాస్ట్ కోసం వెళ్తున్నట్టు వెళ్ళి బ్రేక్ఫాస్ట్ కాదు నా బొంద కాదు తాగడానికి వెళ్ళేవాడిని. ఆ, సో అక్కడ కూర్చుని ఫుల్గా తాగేవాడిని. ఆ, సో సుమారుగా 33 ఏళ్ళు దాకా తాగాను, నాకు 33 ఏళ్ల వయసు వచ్చేదాకా. ఈ మధ్యలో ఆ నేను వాడని ఆ పిల్లు లేదు, నేను వాడని లోషన్ లేదు, నేను వాడని వైద్యం లేదు ఆపడానికి, ఏది పని చేయలేదు. సో కాకపోతే ఈ మధ్యలో ఇంకోటి కూడా చేసావు, ఈ ఎక్కువ తాగాలి అని చెప్పి ఆ నేను ఆ ఎక్కువ తాగేయాలి అని చెప్పి నేను ఆ వేరే పదార్థాలు కూడా వాడాను, అంటే ఇంకా ఎక్కువసేపు తాగలిగేలా ఉండేలా అని చెప్తున్నారు. ప్లీజ్ గో హెడ్.
Right. And so this is my life, and it's getting out of control, and it's starting to affect me personally. I'm losing relationships over it. I'm going through girlfriends and relationships. I'm drinking and behaving badly, and certain things started to happen. Larger consequences start to happen. I think the universe or God or the power will try and get our attention, and I believe in a benevolent universe. And I've come to believe in that through Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank God for AA and thank AA for my relationship with God. And all of a sudden, things are getting worse. I had an overdose in a nightclub in Las Vegas, and I ended up in the back of an ambulance. And I remember going to the hospital, and I remember seeing the nurse, and the nurse was very distraught because at the time, I don't know, I was 24, 25 years old, and the nurse had a son the same age as me. And I remember her looking over me and saying, wow, this time we were lucky you survived that one, but you probably won't survive next time. And she pleaded with me. She said, promise me you won't do that ever again. And I did promise her in that moment. But what she didn't know and I didn't know is that I'm destined to do it again. See, the problem with our alcoholism isn't that we can't drink or we won't drink. The problem with our alcoholism is that we're going to drink. If you're an alcoholic, you're going to drink. Fish swim, birds fly, alcoholics drink, unless we adopt a spiritual way or a new way of life. And I remember she so pleaded with me not to drink again. And I left that hospital at noon the following day, and I was certain, convicted that I wouldn't drink again. I left the hospital at noon, and I had a drink in my hand by 2:30. All of the willpower in the world, all of my swearing off for once and for all of my desire not to drink again lasted me less than 2.5 hours, and I was drunk again. Short time later, things would get worse. I was driving on a work trip in Phoenix, Arizona, and I was in an SUV, and I was drunk, and I'm driving that SUV, and I'm in this traffic, and somebody kind of cuts in front of me, and I overcorrect, and the SUV starts flipping end over end over end over 4 lanes of traffic. And I remember as the car is flipping, I scream out and say something like, "God help me." This was my prayer. This was my cry. And that vehicle in these freeways, there are northbound lanes and southbound lanes, and in between the north and southbound lanes, there are these metal cables, and they're designed that if a car gets out of control, they're designed to stop the car before it goes into oncoming traffic and causes a greater accident. And I remember that car getting split by those cables. It hit those cables and they popped everywhere, and there was this loud crash. And I remember just crawling out of there was a sunroof in the car, and I crawled out of it. And the lights came and the ambulance came, and I had moments of clarity. God would show up on my life and trying to get my attention, whether it was from that nurse or whether it was from well-meaning people. And I remember in this particular instance, I had out of by the grace of God, I lived to tell about it. By the grace of God, I had lacerated my ear. My ear had fallen off. I'd lacerated my head. So we shaved my head down. They had to sew me back up and do reconstructive surgery on this side of my face. And um, I remember I had to go back to whenever you have an accident, they'll take the wreckage of the vehicle and take it to a an industrial sort of lot, like a salvage yard. And I had to go back there to retrieve papers for the insurance claim from the car. And I remember I was there, and at this time I was on some Percocet and painkillers for the surgery and so on. And I go back to my car to get the papers, and I walk in, and there's a huge SUV, steel and metal, and this car was smashed like a wadded up piece of paper. The only space in the entire wreck that was left intact was the little bubble where I was sitting, as though God had perfectly protected that little area. And it overwhelmed me with this sense of gratitude and connection, and there was no doubt in my mind in that moment that God had saved me and there was a God, and that I was never going to drink again. And I didn't take another drink until my prescription for Percocet ran out, because like Dr. Bob, one of our co-founders, I can take other things to slow my alcoholism for a period of time, but as an alcoholic, eventually I will always, always drink again. Translate?
ఓకే. ఓకే. సో ఈయన ఒకసారి బాగా తాగి వేరే పదార్థాలు కూడా వాడి ఓవర్ డోస్ అయింది. అప్పుడు ఈడు చెల్లెలు వచ్చి హాస్పిటల్లో ఈయన్ని అదే బతికారు, ఇంకెప్పుడు తాగనని ప్రామిస్ చేయండి. నిజంగానే నేను అలాగే చేశాను, అంటే పూర్తిగా నమ్ముతూనే. కాకపోతే ఆ శక్తి నా దగ్గర ఉండదని మన బుక్ చెప్పుద్ది. కొన్ని రోజులకి మళ్ళీ తాగా. తాగి అలాగే వేరే పదార్థాలు కూడా చేస్తూ పెద్ద యాక్సిడెంట్ లో పడ్డా. యాక్సిడెంట్ లో పడినప్పుడు నాకు ఎన్ని దెబ్బలు తగిలినాయి కదా, సో పర్కసెట్ అని పెయిన్ కిల్లర్ ఇచ్చారు. హాస్పిటల్ నుంచి అదే ఆ కార్ చూశాను. కారు మొత్తం చెత్త అయిపోయింది. ఈయన కూర్చున్న చోట ఒక్క చోటే అక్కడికి వచ్చి ఆగినాయి, అంటే ఒక బబుల్ అనమాట. అప్పుడు అనుకున్నా, అదే దేవుడు నన్ను రక్షించాడు బాబు దీని నుంచి, నేను చాలా కృతజ్ఞతతో ఉంటా అని చెప్పి ఆ అన్నాడు. అంటే ఇమీడియట్ గా ఏమైంది, ఆ సో ఆ ఆ, ఏమైంది, సరే ఆపేద్దాను అనుకున్నాడు కదా, ఆపేసాడు చాలా కాలం. అయితే ఎందుకు ఆపాడు, పర్కెసెట్ వేసుకుంటున్నాడు కదా, అది తెలియదు ఏంటి. ఆ పర్కెసెట్ అయిపోగానే ఆ మందు మళ్ళీ తాగేశాడు. డాక్టర్ బాబు గారి కథలో చెప్పినట్టే ఆ, ఇది ఆ, ఏంటంటే ఆ, ఆ, మెయిన్గా ఆ, నేను వేరే పదార్థాలతో కూడా ఆపగలుగుతా, ఆయన ఆపినట్టే. కాకపోతే ఏ పదార్థం లేకుండా ఆపి ఉండలేను. పదార్థం అంటే అదే డ్రగ్స్. సో అని చెప్పారు. తాగలేదు కానీ పర్కసెట్ ఉన్నంత కాలం అది అయిపోయాక మళ్ళీ తాగాను అని చెప్తున్నాను. ప్లీజ్ గో హెడ్.
Great. Thank you, Karthik. And so when these things happen, all of a sudden, the universe is turning the volume up, and something had to happen. I'll tell you about my turning point. I'll tell you about the moment. See, around this time, somebody had recommended that I started to get help, and I had started to stumble into meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I would go into meetings and I would leave and I wouldn't stay. And I had a couple DUI court thing where I went to a few meetings and just to satisfy the requirements. And I would go in and out of AA. I got sober August 26, 2011. So I went in and out of AA probably for the better part of a decade, where I would go in for a little bit and I would leave. I would never come all the way in. I would never sit all the way down. I would float and pop in, pop out, never do the work. And things progressed. I became isolated and alone. Friendships fell apart. People disappeared. By the time I got sober, I hadn't talked to my mother in a decade, in almost 10 years. Things were bleak. And I was back in Seattle at the time, and I was really at a low spot in a relationship. And a friend of mine who I had helped in business early on had heard of my situation, so he wanted to help me out, and he brought me from Seattle down to Miami, Florida, so I could straighten out. And I would arrive in Miami that time. I'd been going to Miami for years, but I'd arrive in Miami that time somewhere in the middle of 2010, 2010, into 2010, summer, fall 2010. And I would spend that next year going into one of the darkest places you could imagine. And the way it looked was I in Miami, there's this road, the main road in this area downtown called Brickell. And I lived on this road and I worked in the area. And I had this little condo, and it was a condo that would be overlooking the Atlantic Ocean and this beautiful view, but you wouldn't know it because the shades had been drawn for months. The only outfit I could put on was an old, dirty bathrobe. I would go downstairs in my building to a little bodega, little store, and I would go down there in my bathrobe to buy more alcohol, and then I would return back to my hole with my medicine. And the way it would work in those days is I would come to at whatever hour of the morning, because by this time I was drinking around the clock. I was physically addicted. And so if I went too long without alcohol, I would start to get severe DTs, delirium tremens, and perhaps start to shake and go into seizures and sweat and hear voices. And so I would always keep myself fully loaded with alcohol. And around this time, I'm coming to it whatever hour in the morning, and I'm grasping hopefully for whatever alcohol is left by the bedside table, hoping I didn't drink it all last night. And I would take that bottle and I would drink it down. And I know what it's like in the morning to drink down a drink, knowing that it's going to come right back up. And I know, knowing it's coming right back up, that I'm going to reach for it again. And I would do that, and I would do that. And then I would lean over my sink and I would dry heave and vomit until it felt like my eyeballs were going to pop out of my head. And I didn't do that once or twice. I did that hundreds of times. It was a way of life. That's what my life had become. As Bill put it, I was living, one might say, only to drink. That's all I was doing. And eventually I would get to a place of darkness, and I would lose track of time. I would lose track of my bearings. I wouldn't know which way was up and I wouldn't know which way was down. And eventually I would drink and collapse. and I'd made this service call to fix the air conditioning. I'm not sure in India, but in Miami in the summer, air conditioning is a big priority. It gets really hot and humid in Miami. And so I had called, and the building superintendent, the person who was approved to work on the units, was there. And he entered my unit, and he found me lying unresponsive on the kitchen floor. Had he not shown up, I don't know if I would have choked on my own vomit and died. I don't know what would have happened to me. Slipped perhaps into an alcoholic coma. We've seen that happen before. And I don't know what the outcome would have been, but on that day he came, and I think God sends us angels in the most unsuspecting way. And people, they come into our life for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. And this was the case with me. And his name is Fernando, the AC repair guy. And Fernando would come, and he would wake me up with all of his medical training as a Cuban AC repair guy. He kicked me with his work boot, and I popped up off the ground and poured myself another drink because that's what I do. And then I would make my approach the final time, drunk and dying, crawling back into AA. Maybe we'll translate there.
సో ఇలా తిరుగుతూ తిరుగుతూ పరిస్థితి ఇంకా ఘోరంగా అధ్వానంగా అయిపోయింది. ఇంకా సియాట్లో ఉన్నాను అప్పుడు. నేను ఒకప్పుడు ఒక ఫ్రెండ్ని హెల్ప్ చేశాను బిజినెస్ లో. సో ఆ ఫ్రెండ్ నా పరిస్థితి తెలుసుకుని ఫ్లోరిడాకి తీసుకొచ్చాడు, ఎలాగోలాగా చేద్దామని చెప్పి. కాకపోతే అక్కడ కూడా నేను ఇలాగే కంటిన్యూ అయ్యా. బ్లాక్అవుట్లోకి వెళ్ళటం, వేరే పదార్థాలు తీసుకోవటం మందుతో పాటు. ఎంత ఘోరంగా అయిపోయింది అంటే పరిస్థితి, ఆ, ఒకరోజు ఫోన్ ఎత్తపోతుంటే మా ఫ్రెండ్ అక్కడ ల్యాండ్ లార్డ్కి చెప్పాడు ఏమవుతుందో చూడాలి. ల్యాండ్ లార్డ్ లోపలికి వచ్చి చూస్తే నేను ఫ్లోర్ మీద పడున్నా, స్పృహ లేకుండా. ఆల్కహాల్ కోమాలోకి వెళ్ళిపోయి ఉండొచ్చు, లేకపోతే ఏదైనా జరిగి ఉండొచ్చు, ఒకవేళ ఆ రోజు ఆ ల్యాండ్ లార్డ్ రాకపోతే నా దగ్గరికి. సో ఆ ల్యాండ్ లార్డ్ రావటంతో, దాని తర్వాత మళ్ళీ హాస్పిటల్కి వెళ్ళటంతో మొదటిసారి ఆల్కహాల్ నుంచి ఆ రోజు నుంచి దూరంగా ఉండటం జరిగింది అని చెప్తుంది. ప్లీజ్ గో హెడ్.
And from that moment, I would crawl drunk and dying back into Alcoholics Anonymous. And see, I had been around AA for a long time. I had been around AA, for almost 10 years. I'd heard about the book. I'd sat in meetings. I'd heard about all your stories. I'd heard about your stuff. I just didn't want to accept that I was an alcoholic. I didn't think there was anything here for me. And I would begin the process. And the big difference this particular time was that all the previous times before, my head was filled with objections and chatter and contrast and conflict and resistance. But this time, some grace had been given me to where I was somewhat what you might describe as willing. I began to come to AA in a more open manner. And we're told that there's only three indispensable qualities we got to have. And that's honesty, open-minded, and willingness. Why I didn't know what honesty was. I was full flight from reality. Open-minded, I thought I was open-minded, but what really happened for me was I was given a broken open mind by alcohol. And willingness, I don't know. I don't know about willingness, but it looked a lot for me like deep desperation. And and that's ultimately what ended up happening is I just in a place of desperation started to take one foot and put it in front of the other. And I started to go to these meetings, and I share just a little bit about the people who come into our lives. I would meet this individual, Andy, and Andy would be my first sponsor back, before I met my current sponsor. And I loved Andy. Andy would change my life forever. He was a friend to me. He was an amazing guy. And Andy was the first guy that just became a friend to me. And I didn't know who he was, or what he did for a living or professionally. But it turned out that Andy was a very prominent guy on Wall Street. He had a big a big marketing, big capital firm in New York City. And he became a friend to me, and he was spending time in Miami, and we got close, and he began to sponsor me, and then he would mentor me in business. And Andy would be in my life, and he would change my life forever. And this is a guy in Alcoholics Anonymous who, he had no reason to do all the things he did for me, yet he did. And Andy would change my life. And unfortunately, Andy passed away in 2020, too young, early 60s, great life ahead of him. But he was one of the first individuals to get COVID and was put in a hospital in a medically induced coma, intubated, and just never came out. And so I'd like to mention Andy because Andy would change my life forever, and I love that. I'm indebted to that man today. So how do I pay homage or make my amends or carry the legacy that Andy gave to me? Well, I'll tell you what I do. He's passed away, but I continue and I feel a deeper responsibility to continue practicing Alcoholics Anonymous to carry that memory going forward. And so that happens. And a few months later in December, I was out visiting family and my girlfriend's family at the time back in Las Vegas. I was in Miami, but I'm back in Vegas and I'm going crazy. So I'm like four months sober now, but I'm not doing the work. I'm not doing the step work. I'm not making amends. My prayer life is just by memory. It's rote. I'm not really enlarging my life at all. And I'm in Las Vegas, and my alcoholism starting to settle in. It's starting to make my mind crazy again, and I'm restless. I'm irritable. I'm discontent, and I know what comes next. I know that feeling where the only thing that's going to scratch that itch is a drink, and I know that feeling, and I know it's coming on, but I know I can't drink. So I make a deal with myself. It's like Thursday, and I'm going to be in Vegas until Monday. And I say to myself, I'm not going to drink right now, but if I don't feel any better by Monday when I go back to Miami, I'm drinking. We're drinking. And I decided that maybe I should go to a meeting in the meantime. And it was a Friday, and I called in the U.S. in our AA districts, or large urban areas, they have what's called an intergroup office. And I called that intergroup office, and they had a meeting list. And I said, "It's Friday. Do you have a meeting recommendation in the late afternoon, early evening?" And if you've ever seen or been to Las Vegas, there's a big strip, the Las Vegas Strip, and in between is this real big hotel tower called the Stratosphere. And a few blocks east of the Stratosphere, there's a street corner called 6th and St. Louis. And on that street corner, there's a church. And that's the address they give me in the meetings at 7 o'clock. And I go to that meeting that night, not just to maybe feel a little better. And I made a mistake because my watch was off. I thought I was going to the meeting 5 minutes late, but I wasn't. I showed up to the meeting 55 minutes early. And you know the kind of people that are in AA meeting 55 minutes early, like they're crazy AAs. They're like really into it. And I see these guys running around this church, setting up AA, chain smoking, and I don't know what's going on, but I walk up to the front door and there's a guy standing there. And Vegas gets very cold. It's a desert. It gets cold in the winter. It's kind of cold. You can see your breath. It's very cold. And he puts his hand out and says, "Hi, my name is Bob. How are you?" And that was December 2011. And I would follow that man around for the next 4 or 5 days. And I would eventually ask him to sponsor me. And that man would go on to change my life forever. Maybe a good spot to translate.
సో నేను ఏఐకి వచ్చినప్పుడు ఫస్ట్ ఏంటంటే నిజాయితీ ఉండాలన్నట్టు, ఓపెన్ మైండ్ ఉండాలి, విల్లింగ్నెస్ ఏవీ లేవు. ఓపెన్ మైండ్ అంటే నాది ఏదో త్రాగుడుతో ధ్వంసం అయిన మైండ్. సో ఏమీ లేవు. ఆ, కాకపోతే ఆ, ఆయన పేరు మర్చిపోయాను. నేను పేరు చెప్తారు. ఆయన ఫస్ట్, వాట్ వాజ్ యువర్ ఫస్ట్ ద అదర్ దెన్ యూ సిడ్ యాండీ, రైట్? యా, ఐఎమ్ సారీ. ఓకే. యాండీ అన్న వ్యక్తిని కలిసి ఆ, చాలా సపోర్ట్ చేశాడు ఆయన. ఈయన బిజినెస్ లో మెంటర్ చేసాడు, చాలా గైడెన్స్ ఇచ్చాడు. గత 2000 చాలా చేసి ఇచ్చాడు నాకు యాండీ. కాకపోతే 2011లో, ఐ మీన్ కరోనాలో 2021లో 46కే పోయాడు. ఆ, నాకు 46 కదండి, 56కి పోయాడు. సో ఈయన వచ్చాడు. కాకపోతే ఒక 4-5 నెలలకి ఆ, ఏంటంటే ఇంకా ఆ, అదే ఆ, మెల్లిగా స్టెప్స్ చేయకుండా, ప్రేయర్ మెడిటేషన్ చేయకుండా చాలా వర్స్ట్ గా తయారవుతుంది అనమాట. సో ఈ వేరే ఊరు లాస్ ఏంజల్స్ వెళ్ళినప్పుడు ఒకసారి మీటింగ్ టైంకి వెళ్దాం అని చెప్పి 5 నిమిషాల ముందు ఉందాం అని చెప్పి మీటింగ్ టైంకి వెళ్ళాడు. మీటింగ్ టైంకి వెళ్తే మామూలుగా అక్కడ టైం జోన్ తేడాతోటి గంట ముందు వెళ్ళిపోయాడు. 5 నిమిషాల పనులు 5 నిమిషాల పనులు గంట ముందు వెళ్ళిపోతే ఆ అక్కడ గంట ముందు ఏ మీటింగ్ దగ్గర ఎవరు ఉంటారు? చాలా సీరియస్ గా చేసే వాళ్ళు ఉంటారు. మొత్తం ఇన్ని సెటప్ చేస్తారు, టేబుల్స్ అన్ని బోర్డుల మీద రాస్తారు, చాలా నీట్ గా సెట్ చేసే వాళ్ళు ఉంటారు. ఆ సో అలాగే ఆ మన ఆ సెట్ చేస్తుంటే ఒక ఆయన వచ్చి షేక్ హ్యాండ్ ఇచ్చాడు. అప్పటికి అక్కడ కోల్డ్ గా ఉంటది, ఆయన బయట నుంచుని ఉన్నాడు మెంబర్స్ ని వెల్కమ్ చేయడానికి. లాస్ వేగస్ ఆయనే బాబు. ఆ బాబు కాదు, ఆ ఉండండి, మళ్ళీ ఈ పేరు కూడా మర్చిపోయాను నేను. ఒకసారి నేను పంపాడు నాకు, చూస్తాను. ఎందుకంటే ఆయన స్పాన్సర్ అనమాట. బాబ్ డి. ఆయన లాస్ వేగస్ లో ఉంటాడు. సో మొదట్లో అదే అప్పుడు ఈయనకి షేక్ హ్యాండ్ ఇచ్చి ఆ ఎలా వెల్కమ్ టు ఆల్కహాలిక్స్ అనమస్ అని. సో మెల్లిగా ఆయనతో కూర్చొని మాట్లాడాక ఆయన స్పాన్సర్ కింద తీసుకోవటం జరిగింది. మొత్తం నా జీవితమే మారిపోయింది అక్కడి నుంచి అని చెప్తున్నా. ప్లీజ్ గో హెడ్.
Great, thank you. And I would return to Miami with this new sponsor, and I think maybe Karthik, I think knows Bob, or they've met or know, and he's done some stuff in India, and he is a person who loves Alcoholics Anonymous, and I began to take that love for Alcoholics Anonymous home with me back to Miami, and I would begin to develop this home group with a group of us, and we for 10 years, 2011 until 2022, early 23, we would have the largest active weekly speaker meeting in Miami, and we would meet every Thursday night. Monday and Thursdays was our home group, and got to go on this amazing journey. Um, as Bob and I would go through the step work together, I would begin to have these experiences. I had a step one experience in the depths of my being, this disconnection, this separation, this reality and realization that I can't live and drink, but of myself, I can't keep from drinking, that I'm completely powerless, and that my life is a disaster, totally unmanageable. And for the first time, I began to see maybe there was a magic in Alcoholics Anonymous. Maybe there was something there for me to see. And that was my step two at the time, coming to believe that all of you had something that maybe I could have too if I did what you did. And then the third expression in step three was turning my will and my life, or really, what does that mean? It's really just my thoughts and my actions, my will and my life, my thoughts and my actions, over to the care of this thing, this AA, this community, this thing, this power that becomes my higher power. And I would go on to write my inventory. And in writing this inventory and putting my life down in black and white, I began to see the truth of my life, maybe for the very first time ever. And I began to see that my troubles and my problems were basically of my own making. And I was to see that if there was to be an issue in my life, my fingerprints were all over it, that I was the one who had caused the trouble. And from there we began to make a list of the harms, and I would go about and set forth to setting those harms right. And I was out with Bob one time, visiting him for a while, doing the work, and I would run her. I felt like an homage to Dr. Bob. I ran around Vegas for a couple of days trying to make amends to everybody I could, and as I began to start to make amends, the promises that we are told in the ninth step began to come true in my life. I began to feel peaceful. I began to feel free of my mind. I began to be able to look the world in the eye. And from that point, it started to get better and better. And eventually, I would begin to make amends to my mother and I would begin to develop a relationship with her. And I hadn't seen her in about a decade, and that began slowly. But, one visit turned into a second visit, and the second visit turned into a third visit. And slowly but surely, we would eventually develop a relationship now for, the past 14 years. And one of the things that I'm doing now is taking care of my parents. I believe there comes a time if if we're fortunate enough to have our parents living, there comes a time in everyone's life where we trade places, where the parents become the children and we become the parents. And I'm going through that part of the process right now in my life with my mother. And I bridged the gap and repaired the relationship with my sister, and I began to take the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous and practice them within my life. And as a result, my life would flourish. And that 10-year period was profound, and it cemented my membership in Alcoholics Anonymous. And we do a couple sponsorship retreats every year in Las Vegas, and we run around and do conferences all over the place with Bob, and are just super active. And the biggest thing, there were two things that started to occur in my life that would really transform me. I would make the amends, obviously, and then I would begin to practice a deeper step 11 practice. And Andy and I, before he passed, would go on this journey to seek out meditation. And it's serendipitous that we're having a conversation, and this group is in India. One of the more profound practices that I was introduced to originated in India. It was a practice of vipassana, and in the U.S. there are uh, silent vipassana retreats, and they're 10 days. The version they do here is 10-day silent meditations, and I began to practice those, and was practicing about a one 10-day course or 10-day sit every year. And then my course closed down during the pandemic, 2020 2021. So I made some adjustments, but my step 11 practice, my meditation practice really deepened. And the thing that really transformed me was my beginning to work with others. See, I'm a believer that in Alcoholics Anonymous, we come here and our lives are restored. So true, completely true. And then I believe that if you practice these elements and these principles, it'll work the first time every time. It comes alive in your life. And the reality is, it stays that way as long as we do what we talked about for the topic of the meeting, which was attempting to perfect and enlarge our spiritual life, which none of us will ever. The best we can ever get in this lifetime is human. And the idea that I'll never achieve the perfection does not mean that I shouldn't pursue it. That's the paradox. I should pursue the unachievable, because through God, I can transform my life in a way I never imagined. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, that began to happen. So I started to sponsor so many individuals. And in sponsorship, as many of you know, you experience the tragic and the miraculous. I've had many sponsees die who lost the battle with alcoholism. And I carry on their legacy and memory by doing what we're doing today. See, I want in AA, I want to walk the whole walk. I want to go the whole way. I want to carry this message and grow and enlarge my spiritual life until my very last breath. Good place to pause.
Yep. సో ఆయన ఏంటంటే ఈ బాబు మీకు తెలిసే ఉండాలి, ఇండియాలో కూడా ఆయన కొన్ని చేశారు. చాలా మంచి ఎంథూజియాస్టిక్ మెంబరు. ఆయన చెప్తున్నారు నేను స్పాన్సరు బాబ్ది. కాకపోతే ఆ ఎంథ్యూజియాజంనే నేను బాబు దగ్గర నేర్చుకుంది. నేను మళ్ళీ అదే మయామికి వెళ్ళినప్పుడు ఒక చిన్న హోమ్ గ్రూప్ స్టార్ట్ చేసి అక్కడ కూడా ఇలాంటి ఎంథూజియాజంని తీసుకురావడానికి ప్రయత్నించాం. సో ఈ ఆ, ఒకసారి ఏదో నేను ఇలాగా చేస్తుంటే నాలో మార్పులు, బయట మార్పులు ఇవన్నీ చూసి నా ఫేస్ కూడా పెరిగింది. ఆ, మూడో సోపానానికి వచ్చేసరికి నాకు ఈ తెలియని దేవుడికి నేను ఎలా ఇవ్వాలి అంటే ఆల్కహాల్ అయితే ఆ సరెండర్ చెయ్యాలి నా ఇచ్చని జీవితాన్ని. నాలుగులో నా తప్పులు చూసుకుని ఐదులో ఆయనకి చెప్పి ఆ, నాకు ఒకటి రియలైజేషన్ అయిపోయింది. ప్రతి తప్పు కూడా నేను చేస్తుంది. ఐ మీన్ ప్రతి రిజైన్మెంట్ కూడా నేను తయారు చేస్తుంది. సో ఇది ఆ, నా పుస్తకంలో రాసినట్టే నాకు కూడా అనుభవం. అమెండ్స్ చేశాక నా ప్రామిసెస్ మొదలైనాయి. నిజంగా చెప్పాలంటే నేను లాస్ వేగస్ వెళ్ళి అంత అటు ఇటు కంగారు కంగారుగా అన్ని చోట్లకి తిరిగి నాకు ఇంకా గుర్తుంది అన్ని అమెండ్స్ చేసి ఆ, చేశాను. నా 11వ సోపానం అయితే ఆండీతో పాటు వెళ్ళేవాడిని మేము సంవత్సరానికి ఒకసారి. యాక్చువల్లీ ఇండియాదే విపాసన, అది ఇక్కడ కోర్స్ ఉంటుంది 10 10 రోజులు. సంవత్సరానికి ఒకసారి 10 రోజుల కోర్సు విపాసన చేసేవాళ్ళం. కాకపోతే పాండమిక్ లో కొంచెం అదే కరోనా టైంలో కొంచెం దానికి బ్రేక్ పడి నా అడ్జస్ట్మెంట్స్ నేను చేసుకున్నాను మెడిటేషన్ లో ఆ, అని చెప్తున్నారు. కాకపోతే ఎన్నిటికంటే ముఖ్యమైనది ఇది ఇతరులకి పంచటం. ఉమ్, ఇతరులకి పంచటం. సో ఇతరులకి పంచడం ఎలాగా అంటే ఎందుకంటే దాంట్లోనే ఉంది ఇదంతా, ఈ బ్యూటీ. చాలా మందికి పంచాను, చాలా మంది ఈ దీంతో పోట్లాడలేకపోయారు. అండ్ వాళ్ళ మెమరీలోనే ఈరోజు పంచుకుంటూ వెళ్తున్నాను. ఆ, కొంతమంది నిలబడగలుగుతారు, కొంతమంది పోతారు. సో ఆ మెమరీలోనే నేను ఇతరులకి పంచుకుంటూ వెళ్తాను అని చెప్తున్నారు. ప్లీజ్ గో.
Right. And and so now I'm in this place, this will be maybe the I think this is our last little section here. So I'll try and share just the last few bits of my life today. Is that the one thing that I think has been my saving grace all these years is the continued practice of this process. Never perfectly, always making mistakes, totally imperfect, but each day trying to get better and better. And around the early part of 2020, we all remember when the pandemic happened, and I don't know what the fallout was in India in your area, but in Miami, being an urban city, everything was shut down and locked down completely. So most of the AA groups would lose access to their meeting spaces in churches and otherwise. So what ended up happening is we all came here. We all moved online to Zoom. And it was a great experience to all connect together and have that one-on-one connection. And during that year, that last part of 2020, we would dive deeply and do tons of meetings and tons of AA, and we just did it kind of nonstop all day long, and it was a fun experience. And then eventually, ultimately, what happened is around that time, I have a friend. He's married. His wife is he's Colombian, but not from Medellin, and his wife is Paisa from here. And they invited me to get out of Miami, and they knew my mentor Andy had died. Get out of Miami, come down to Colombia, enjoy some time down here. And so finally, I did, and I took my first trip there at the end of 2020. And when I arrived in Colombia for the first time, it was magical. I think it had partly to do with everything I'd experienced and partly to do with how fantastic Colombia is. But it's much, much more than the days of Pablo Escobar and narco traffickers and bombing cities and the danger that everyone hears about. But there's a literary style in that references Colombia. It's called magical realism because it really is a spectacular place. And I came down and I began my life down here, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen. But slowly but surely, I met some folks in AA, and slowly but surely developed a group. And slowly but surely, we're now developing something like a community. And our little AA community is growing and thriving and growing and thriving. And it's all coming together. And before I got to hang out with all of you fine people, my home group meets 9 a.m. every Saturday morning. If any of you are ever in Medellin, Colombia, we invite you to join us. We're also a hybrid meeting, so I'll pass on the it's English speaking, but I'll pass on the link to Karthik if anybody's ever interested in joining a meeting in Medellin, Colombia. And and today I do the same. I do the same thing today that Bob taught me in my first 6 months, right? Same thing. Go to a meeting, show up early, do service, put your hand out for the newcomer, make yourself available. Whenever you're asked by anyone to do anything in AA, the only answer is yes. And see, as I've kept this part of my life, my primary purpose in AA, everything else in my life has fallen into place. And here's my experience. I hope to someday meet Karthik in person and some of you fine people. But if you're new or you're making your approach, here's what I can tell you. Everything that's happened to me is not exceptional. I'm just like you. We are the same. My experience is all the transformation that's promised in the book in Alcoholics Anonymous is equally and freely available to each and every one of us, provided we take the actions. Karthik, I want to thank you so much for letting me hang out, and I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you so much.
ఓకే. సో ఏంటంటే పాండమిక్ టైం అప్పుడు చాలా మీటింగ్లు అయ్యి క్లోజ్ అయిపోయింది. ఆ టైంలోనే నేను ఇలా ఆన్లైన్ మీటింగ్లు అటెండ్ అవుతుంటే ఈ కొలంబియా ఇప్పుడు నేనున్న నగరం నుంచి నాకు రిక్వెస్ట్ వచ్చింది. ఆ, నువ్వు ఇక్కడికి రావచ్చు కదా, బానే ఉంటది అని చెప్పి. మేము చాలా వర్క్ చేసేవాళ్ళం ఆ మీటింగ్లో కూడా. ఉమ్, సో నేను కొలంబియా వెళ్ళటం జరిగింది. ఇది ఒక అద్భుతమైన ప్లేస్ అనుకోండి కొలంబియా. చాలా అందంగా ఉంటది, మిరాక్యులస్ గా ఉంటది. మీరు ఏదైనా ఉండొచ్చు కానీ ఇంతకు ముందు కాస్త అది కాకుండా ఇప్పుడు చాలా బాగుంది కొలంబియా. ఉమ్, ఇక్కడ కూడా అదే చేస్తుంది, ఏం వేరేగా చెయ్యట్లే. ఇతరులకి పంచటం ఈ ప్రోగ్రామ్ ని క్షుణ్ణంగా రోజు ఆ మొదటి రోజు ఏదైతే నేర్పించారో మొదట్లో అదే ఈ రోజుకి చేస్తుంది. ఉమ్, ఎందుకంటే మనం పర్ఫెక్షన్ అవ్వం, కాకపోతే పర్ఫెక్షన్ కే ఏం చేయాలి. ఏం ఎప్పుడు పర్ఫెక్షన్ కే ఉండాలి, మనం పర్ఫెక్షన్ అవ్వకపోయాం. సో ఏంటంటే మీరు ఒకవేళ కొలంబియా ఇంగ్లీష్ మీటింగ్ ఉంది, కావాలంటే మీకు లింక్ పెడతాను, ఎవరైనా కావాలంటే జాయిన్ అవ్వచ్చు అని చెప్తున్నారు. థ్యాంక్ యూ హెన్రీ, థ్యాంక్ యూ సో మచ్ ఫర్ యువర్ టైం.